fact, you're still watching Opposing Views special coverage of the 2014 Philippine Intercollegiate Debating Championships. We're getting towards the last portions of the debate. Let's now have the opposition reply by Alan Cabrera. You have 4 minutes, and after that, 4 minutes will also be given to Leomar Doctorero for the government's reply.
Let's take a look at two things in assessing this debate. First is on structural reform, and second is on poverty alleviation. On the idea of structural reform, what we saw coming from UPD was a shifting and contradictory stance. Because Leomar began this debate by saying, oh, do not hang your hat on government reform because it will never come, because it is so unlikely. Suddenly, when Bart challenged that leader of opposition and we raised several POIs, UPD was probably very impressed by the rhetoric because they decided to drop Leomar and instead say, you can ask for structural reforms later. We think number one, that was an explicit contradiction of what Leomar said about never wanting to hang your hats on structural reform. But secondly, there was no explanation as to why we can hang our hats on structural reform later, but we can't do it now. Like, what is really the difference between later and now if there will always be poverty, if there will always be oppression? But thirdly, it was very, very strange for them to say you can ask for structural reforms later when the substantive tirade of the GovWhip speaker was suddenly about all of the harms of demanding for structural reform. When he said that you bother society, that you create traffic, that you make people dislike you. We think, ladies and gentlemen, all of these are arguments as to why in their world asking for structural reform is never a good thing. Because whether we do it now or later, there will always be traffic, there will always be people who will be opposed to your structural reform. So the important question that they need to answer and that they fail to answer is, when will you demand for structural reform if not now? And this is where the second part of this idea of structural reform comes in. We need to weigh the likelihoods for reform. Because it's not fair to let AF get away with, oh, we can reform later, baka next year, 5 years from now. We don't really know because they were very vague about that. But what we did for you in this debate is to weigh the likelihoods of when reform can happen. I told you in my speech that right now, with lots of dissent in society, there is already very limited reform. What more if you tell everybody, don't complain, it's your fault, you better work harder. And we think, ladies and gentlemen, this is precisely the rhetoric that even doesn't allow the state to begin to understand where the reform should come from. So even in terms of weighing where reform is more likely, we think that reform is more likely when there is dissent, when people are challenging the structure actively instead of focusing on working hard. The second thing is about poverty alleviation. We appreciated the very simple and simplistic analysis coming from AF. They said, work hard first. Society will reward you later. That sounds like a great place to live in. But you just portrayed at your deputy speech that that is not the world in which you live in. Even if you work hard every single day, even if you do everything that you can possibly and humanly do, sometimes your labor is not appreciated because that is how the world works. That is what you said in the beginning of your deputy speech. So then, that's why we began to challenge the lens by which you view hard work. That's why Ina and I said, when will you ever view this work to be hard when there is no structural change recognizing the inherent value of work? That's even why Bart brought you the idea of blue-collar and white-collar labor, which, by the way, they never even challenged. We think that there were so many ideas coming from Negbench which they decided not to engage with. Instead, decided to talk for 3 minutes about the story of a successful black man, which, by the way, I already told you could potentially be an outlier rather than the rule for how you eventually get out of poverty. Finally, if we take a look at the very, very best case scenario of these guys, it is day-to-day subsistence. But they never answered the question as to why day-to-day subsistence is sufficient, especially when this rhetoric is what has been driving intergenerational poverty. It is why my father, my grandfather, and my child will be poor because you never challenge a structure that changes the valuation of what hard work truly is. We are proud to take this championship.
I thank the opposition reply speaker. I now call on the government reply speaker.
It's funny that Alan talked in his reply speech about how likely do you get the harms. Because the first question I want to ask is, which side really operationalized their policy? because the consistent questioning that we had from the start is, how do you do the challenging the system, challenging the structures that you really want? They just said, well, we can challenge the system. It's going to be more likely. But when it comes to the crucial question of challenging and how do you do it, no response. Ateneo was mum. Conversely, we told you that challenging the system comes from my speech in the sense that you challenge the system by passing that system, by transgressing that system in the sense that you're better than the system, that even if the system restricted you, you still are essentially successful at the end of the day. So as far as challenging the system is concerned, they never really had a clear, coherent stance. That's first. But second, they had to respond to my stance about challenging that system as well. We think as far as operationalization goes, government definitely takes debate. Second, let's assess engagements. Because Ina's intro talked about people who work hard but weren't recognized. But doesn't that mean that she's agreeing you have to work hard first for all their values to accrue? What they had to be able to analyze was there ever a situation where people didn't work hard at all and people just pushed for reform? Conversely, we argued situations where people just worked hard and didn't have to push for reform. The Zanbalin, who were eventually organically accepted into that society, even though they didn't have to organically reform. So they never really fulfilled their burden of engagement by just talking about those people who work hard but essentially don't fight for the rights anyway. What you have to understand is that their burden here is for people or for these leaders to teach these people not to work hard at all. And if they're saying that they have to work hard first, that's a concession with government bench in this debate. Thirdly, they never really responded to the crucial nuances of the argumentation. When Alan came here and argued about the portrayal bit, like people are still going to be portrayed as bad, he had to be able again to respond to the nuances of our argumentation as far as portrayal is concerned. Because they had to disprove first why the portrayal we were talking about, that these people will be portrayed as crucial parts of your society, as crucial people, people who fulfill a crucial role in your society, is essentially not true at the end of the day. So that has to work for their idea of portrayal to work at the end of the day. Secondly, they said that people are going to see you in a good light. People are going to see you in a good light under the structure. But again, this is under the frame that people have to work hard first. Because we posited already very consistently that if you don't work hard first to attain all the benefits coming from opposition, people are just going to see you as lazy slobs who block traffic in EDSA at the end of the day. Thirdly, Alan talked about the idea that there's a contradiction. Well, just because Alan can analyze multiple situations doesn't necessarily mean there's a contradiction. In fact, Alan talked about the contradiction because it highlights the fact that there was never a response from opposition about my sustainability point. We agree that in the ideal world, people should be getting the rights, people should be getting the benefits. But a simple question to be asked is, what if it's not yet there? They said people shouldn't be content with just subsistence. But what are they getting under opposition side? Not subsistence at all, because people wouldn't be janitors, because people are going to start waiting for what's essentially there at the end of the day. So number one, if it's not yet there, then opposition ultimately has no response, that's first. But second, if government chooses to give it to you, but eventually takes it away, like what I analyzed in politically volatile situations, they had no response. Why not working hard is a crucial part. So ultimately what you have to understand is one, they never fulfill their burden because all of their defenses are contingent upon this idea that you have to work hard first, like what government wants in this debate. That's first. But second, they just said that there was a contradiction coming from thin air when they failed to respond to my crucial sustainability analysis. For all those reasons, Alan shouldn't be proud to take the championship because we're definitely bringing it home.
I thank government reply. Speaker, you may now cross the House.
All right. Judges have deliberated in a concealed room, and they have the results. So let's now call on the chief adjudicator, Mr. Jake Bustos. Jake?
And now to announce this year's national champion. So it was a 7-2 split. The champion of the Philippine Intercollegiate Debating Championship 2014 is Opposition Ateneo A.
All right, we would like to thank the UP Debate Society and the Asian Development Bank for making Opposing Views and Solar News Channel a part of this year's Philippine Intercollegiate Debate Championships. And that's our Opposing Views for tonight. Tune in again next week for another bold and engaging discussion on today's most relevant issues. This has been the 2014 Philippine Intercollegiate Debating Championships. I'm Rod Nepomuceno. Good night and God bless.